Here we go, something a little bit different. Today, instead of reviewing BattleBots, I'm going to be reviewing Robot Wars. Now, admittedly, I wasn't sure how to start reviewing Robot Wars, because I wanted to start off by showing just how good Robot Wars can be, but I realised that starting off with some of the latter seasons would require me to give a lot of context as to several of the robots. It just would waste a lot of time, so, well, I didn't really want to. We're going to have to start off with the first season, all the way back in the late 90s, and we're going to have to work our way from there. And hey, maybe we'll see some hidden gems in these earlier seasons. It should be interesting, so come with me as we watch the evolution, the rise and the fall of Robot Wars, starting off with Series 1, Heat A. After the intro, Jeremy Clarkson welcomes us all to the show, and Jeremy is far more blasé than your typical robot show hosts, and you can tell that the show, and I guess really the sport, is still finding its footing as it tries to figure out its presentation on the TV. After that, they show some of the American Robot Wars fighting as the Master and Four duke it out. Honestly, I'm gonna tell you this, they are setting your expectations way too high with that first fight. I'd love to have seen the Master and Four, no, not that one, competing, because those really show that, the Americans got a nice head start, and clearly they knew exactly what they were doing, because that looked like a lot of fun. Anyway, they then show the teams on this season working on the robots backstage before introducing the key component of Robot Wars. See, Robot Wars has many obstacles that it introduces over the years, but two of the bits that would go on to make the core DNA, the core identity of Robot Wars, is the Pit of Oblivion, which isn't actually in this series, weirdly enough. But what is this season are the house robots. Now, for those who aren't aware, the house robots are basically moving obstacles. They're controlled by the show itself, and they often have stuff that break the rules. They typically weigh more than the competitors. They'll wield weapons that maybe aren't allowed by the competitors, such as a flamethrower. The idea is that they're essentially obstacles in their own right. Get too close to them and you'll have to duke it out with them. And it actually leads to a lot of fun that we're going to see later on in seasons where robots start fighting back against the house robots and getting the upper hand. It's honestly a lot of fun. And they introduce the first four house robots of the show's run. Shunt with the scoop and the axe. Matilda with the pneumatic lifting tusks and a chainsaw tail. Dead Metal with the grabbing pincer arms and a saw arm that comes down, kind of similar to the way that Saw Blades or Scorpios work. And finally, Sergeant Bash with a bayonet, a little circular disc on the back, and most importantly, that flamethrower, which honestly becomes the most iconic part of Sergeant Bash's offense. These are four of the most iconic house robots and still look cool, even in these original, unrefined forms. The arm on Dead Metal, the bayonet on Sergeant Bash, and Matilda's chainsaw show that they aren't quite refined yet, but still, looking at them really leaves an impression. Now, they show off the robots this heat. Roblox shows up first, weighing in at 82.5 kilograms. Next up is Killertron, weighing in at 72.2 kilograms. Then we see Barry weighing in at 116.9 kilograms. Shogun comes in weighing 82.7 kilograms, Nemesis comes in weighing 76.8 kilograms, and Grunt weighing in at just 45 kilograms. You can see that the sport being so young in the UK means a whole host of different weights within these robots, with several robots being either notably underweight or very overweight. Next up, the Gauntlet is introduced while the house robots drive around the Spikes Go and the drills, or as I like to call them, Killerlock glory holes, keep going. They also have a swinging mace. I'm really glad that the show would eventually start to pick up that they need to be a bit safer, because this feels like it could have gone, it was a little bit dangerous, that's all I'll say. Now, the way that this works is that they'll start up with the robots going out, and basically they have to cover as much distance as they can, or better yet, complete the course. The robot that goes the shortest distance will be eliminated. I'll admit I don't like these non-combat rounds because I'm here to watch robots fight. We're seeing the robots, but we're not really seeing the war. Anyway, Roblox starts off, and they do have a little bit of a rough start at first as they struggle to get off the turntable before they decide to go down the route with the house robots, easily getting past them and going for the finish. With a completion, Roblox will be going to the next round without a doubt. Then there was Barry, who rushed right out but crashed, and after some issues tussling with Sergeant Bash, they tried to run away, and unfortunately, while the scoop being low would normally be a good thing in combat, because they're in the gauntlet, it gets caught on the ramp, and unfortunately they're not really able to get away from that position as Matilda comes in with her chainsaw and tries to push them off. Really, they just don't do anything after this point. With a distance of 2.93 meters, Barry obviously was going to end up eliminated here. Next up, Shogun was ready to go, and Shogun easily cleared the first ramp without any issues, but upon the second ramp, they ended up falling off and ending on their side. Matilda comes in with her tusks and does some damage to the side from the looks of things, but their run ends there. Still, they got further than Barry, and therefore they wouldn't be eliminated from the competition. Then we got one of the more iconic robots of Series 1, besides Roadblock of course, which, if you don't know, you'll find out. It's Nemesis. Nemesis comes out of the gate and over the first ramp without much issue, and then easily clear the second ramp and into Matilda, but they easily get past them, being the second robot to complete the gauntlet and are guaranteed to get into the next round. Grunt is up next and immediately wedges Dead Metal. Once they break away, they're pinned by Matilda, and finally they break free and make it to the end, easily getting past them all with their speed. With Grunt completing the gauntlet, that means that they're guaranteed to move on to the next round as well. Finally, Killertron's turn to go as they make their way up the ramp with little issue before bumping into Dead Metal. They struggle on the obstacles as they finally get on the second ramp, and then get stuck similar to Shogun as they hit some springs? This gauntlet is really strange. Still, making 11 meters means that Barry is the one that is eliminated at the first round. Probably for the best, given how Barry would be so overweight even by modern standards. I know people give the what ifs about Grunt, considering I believe it's a loner bot, and therefore probably should have got out in the first round, but I think a massively overweight bot potentially winning the entire season would have been a bigger controversy. Now, I'll be honest with you, the gauntlets are a bit hit and miss. You can tell that this really hasn't been ironed out yet, and again, I want to see the robots fight, and this isn't really doing it for me. Next up is the sumo event, where the robots have to either survive for a minute with Shunt trying to push them out, or better yet, push Shunt out of the circle themselves. Shunt, in a strange choice, typically goes plow first in this series and not scoop first, though I imagine with the fact that some of these Series 1 robots are a little rough, I have to imagine it's likely to give them a fighting chance here. Anyway, Shogun starts off and does little to nothing, essentially making an attempt to break away as they're currently being pushed on by their side from Shunt causes them to go off the edge. Shogun blows a kiss off of the edge in a funny moment in the show admittedly, but lasting 21 seconds, things were looking risky for them. Next up, Killertron, instead of pushing, actually tries swinging for Shunt. Shunt doesn't seem as bothered as they only ever swing back once. Killertron does manage to survive till the very end, mainly by just doing nothing really. It didn't seem like they were trying to get away, it didn't seem like they were trying to push back. After they got a few swings, they just decided to sit there and only really move when they got too close to the edge so they could get back to the center. Killertron obviously managed to survive the minute, but it got extremely boring after they stopped swinging. Next up, Roadblock was ready to take on Shunt, and Shunt actually goes scoop first this time, likely because they already know that Roadblock possesses a threat given that it's got an actual wedge to it. Now, one thing that becomes immediately obvious from the bird's eye view is Roadblock is extremely wide. It basically dwarfs Shunt in the amount of space it takes on the floor. There's a bit of a back and forth as Shunt gets under Roadblock, but then once Roadblock gets under Shunt, it easily pushes them off the circle and goes down with them. Honestly, this was the best sumo performance of the lot, as Roadblock shows its dominance. That was actually kind of exciting. And then you get Nemesis' turn at the sumo, and they race right away to Shunt and nearly go right off the edge from Shunt's pushing. They really don't have much they can do, however, Shunt manages to make some critical driving errors. By backing away to try and face on against Nemesis once again, Nemesis would again get in close, meaning Shunt essentially backed into the edge where Nemesis managed to nudge them off without even falling off themselves. It seems that Shunt actually ended up making a similar mistake to what Shogun did, and it was actually kind of interesting to see how Nemesis managed to actually be quite tactical in its sumo attempt. So with that being said, that means Nemesis, along with Roadblock, managed to not only survive, but beat Shunt in the sumo contest. Pretty good, all being said. Finally, Grunt is up next and basically just drives right off of the circle. Out in mere seconds, laughing all along the way, they end up losing, which means Shogun survives. Given that Grunt was a stock bot, I think some people will be very happy about this. But man, it definitely was a crazy thing to see and a little bit of a letdown. I'd like to have seen Grunt at least try a little bit before flinging itself off, but well. Still, the performances from Nemesis and Roadblock were still pretty good all the same. Now finally, the battles begin! These episodes in the beginning are only half an hour long, and 20 minutes of it have been spent on these random contests. It's really left me hungering for some actual battles. Now, they explain the judging criteria: damage, control, aggression, all standard stuff, and the ever nebulous style category, which the closest thing that it seems to be that the Robot Wars wiki explains it is the style is meant to be how much the robot entertain, which I guess you don't want to have a robot that just bores the audience senseless, but given that this is already a very subjective thing, judging a robot, this really is something that I imagine led to a lot of the controversial decisions that ends up in Robot Wars history. Anyway, the first fight is between Nemesis and Roadblock. Now, Roadblock clearly has the advantage with the lower ground clearance, and I was interested to see if Nemesis could do anything against them. The fight begins and Roadblock comes in actually back first, scratching some of the fur off with their rear saw blades, shockingly not shoving them around. Nemesis definitely does look worse for wear, however, but then Roadblock drives into the CPZ, the Corner Patrol Zone, where the house robots roam. Matilda attacks Roadblock with the chainsaw, though Sergeant Bash then comes in with the flamethrower and catches Nemesis on fire. It isn't a huge fire compared to what we'd see in later seasons, but it definitely was exhilarating compared to what we saw before. Much appreciated, and it's good to see a little bit of excitement come to the show here. The fight ends on that and Roadblock moves on. Nemesis is out of the competition and likely for the best, as the team would go on to better things with their next robot, Dietor. This fight actually isn't too bad by the standards of this series, which means the fight wasn't that good, but the fire and Sawblade did help somewhat. Next up was Killertron and Shogun. Now, Killertron had the obvious advantage to me with the pickaxe, as neither robot was particularly low to the ground. Now, the fight starts and Shogun has some notable drive issues at first as it veers to the side before finally running into Killertron. Killertron swings the axe, though very lethargically, as it doesn't really do a whole lot, before sitting and spinning with the axe instead. Shogun then drives away and gets stuck on the grill. Killertron goes in for some swings with the pickaxe, as Sergeant Bash then comes in to try and liven things up as it goes in with the saw blade against Killertron, but the disc breaks off. Now, the fight ends there as Shogun is unable to continue, and Killertron will move on to the heat final. This was not much of a fight, as Shogun wasn't able to do much of anything, and Killertron basically won with the Luigi strategy, doing nothing. Finally, we're on to the final fight of the night, Killertron versus Roadblock. Both robots come out, and some nice swings from Killertron, definitely better than its Shogun fight, as it gets some nice swings on Roadblock. Though Roadblock easily ends up wedging them and pushes them into the sides and the CPZ, where Sergeant Bash blasts Killertron with the flamethrower. Killertron manages to escape before being wedged again, and Roadblock, with a little bit of a tussle and a little bit of a nudge from dead metal into Roadblock, Roadblock manages to tip Killertron over onto their side. Seeing as Stream X weren't yet a thing at this point, at least in the UK, that means Roadblock wins and will move on to the grand final. This was actually probably the best fight of the night, as both robots actually managed to get some offense in, so it was a little bit more competitive than the previous fights tonight. overall, this episode really gives me a great appreciation for how far things have come nowadays when watching BattleBots as well as the modern day UK scene. It also leaves me excited to see the tech evolve throughout Robot Wars as we go through the series, as it really does get exciting. But yeah, Series 1 really is a bit of a bitter pill to swallow. We're not going to see anything that crazy, but at the very least we are starting to see the foundation be laid for what will come, so I can appreciate it in that sense, at least. Welcome back, everyone, to the second review of Robot Wars Series 1. Now, last time was kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting to be able to do this back-to-back with the latest season of BattleBots. You know, getting to see where we are now versus the early days of this sport. It really is a major contrast. But we're not going to waste any more time. Let's get started. And to start things off, man, Jeremy Clarkson's hosting really does feel at odds with literally everything else. I'm really glad that this was a one and done thing with Jeremy, as we really did get a huge upgrade by moving to Craig Charles. Anyway, the robots that came out today were Ugly Bots, which looked like it was made out of paper mache, weighing in at 71.9 kilograms. You had Scrapper, which with those eyes looks horrifying, but otherwise, you know, I can see what they were going for with the machine, you know, given that, you know, we didn't know how effective saws were at the time, that it made a lot of sense. It's weighing in at 76.5 kilograms. Then there's Recyclops, made by the legendary Rex Garrett, who ended up becoming a Robot Combat legend. This robot weighs in at 79.5 kilograms, making the most of what I believe was a supposed to be 80 kilogram weight limit at the time. Then you got Detonator, the absolute, just peak robotics right there, weighing in at 52.5 kilograms. Then Mortis, coming in at 78.4 kilograms, which Mortis is another robot I really enjoy. If you don't know yet, I've got a bit of a soft spot for Axebots and Hammerbots, and Mortis, given that this is a Series 1 robot, really you can see that it is made out of different stuff. This is a very well-made robot for the time. Then there's Leebot, which also looked actually pretty solid, weighing in at 69 kilograms. Nice. Now, the Gauntlet is about as usual. Leebot is up first. It has a rear saw similar to Roblox and basically a 4-bar lifter, which, for the time, that's actually pretty good. Robots like Biohazard were absolutely killing the competition with a 4-bar lifter in the States, so Leebot was actually pretty of its time. Now, Leebot does have some issues with the first ramp, and it wasn't helped by Bash holding this ramp up. Though realising its mistake, Bash does end up backing off, allowing Leebot to clear the first ramp. And then, when rising up the second ramp, there's a lot of smoke, I think, from Sergeant Bash's flamethrower. But the 4-bar lifter has a fan on it, which blows away the smoke. It's actually kind of funny, and definitely the best Gauntlet run so far, as they end up finishing it. Scrapper is up next, and while they also struggle with the first ramp, in this case it's seemingly because the caster wheels are causing them to swivel about. It was like the most unruly shopping trolley. But sorry, to take it off tangent, they then cut to like the, you know, they usually cut to like a video showcasing the robot like at certain points, and they show off Scrapper. They turned the saw blades on at the table? Oh my god. Sorry, I know we're just going on tangent, but the show did the same thing. I was aghast. I heard about how the show was unsafe in the early season, but I forgot just how unsafe. My god! Scrapper decides to go for the maze instead of the ramp after it just struggled a bit too much, and is blocked off by Bash and Shunt, and immediately ends up stuck in the middle of the maze. Shunt runs into them a few times, and Scrapper finishes off at 7.4 meters. Definitely a little riskier distance for them. Then it's Recyclops' turn in the Gauntlet as they race right out of the gate, and you can tell the machine is a cut above the rest here. It struggles running into Bash, but the moment they get some freedom, they run full pelt into Matilda. Very impressive run, and definitely one of the better engineered robots as they end up completing the Gauntlet. Next up, it's Detonator's turn, and they immediately get stuck on the turntable. They cannot move. They're done. Sergeant Bash comes over to have a look, and Detonator is finally shoved free by Shunt, who practically has to push them along as Detonator is struggling to do anything. Suddenly, the moment they're able to move, you can hear what the team member, I believe his name David Crosby, yelling, "Go, go, go, go!" as Detonator moves like an extra meter or two? 7 meters, safe to say that is not a good look for them. Then it was Mortis's turn, and it looked so sleek. Mortis speeds out, only stopping briefly from crashing into the wall. Mortis ends up then crashing into Bash, where Shunt and Matilda come in to fight. Shunt gets a nice shove in with the axe, and Mortis is basically stuck at this point. To be fair, if Shunt let up with the axe, Mortis would have likely completed, but it seems like Shunt actually got the axe tip partially stuck in Mortis, meaning they kept Mortis in place. Still, with a distance of 7.4 meters tying with Scrapper, they are safe. Then it was Uglybot's turn, and Uglybot gets stuck on the turntable as well, but has slightly better luck getting free. It's a shame Shunt decided to absolutely go over the top bullying them. Uglybot really had no hope, as Shunt just ruined any chance they had, as they just pushed them all the way back to the turntable. This went above anything I would have expected. This seems way more aggressive than any of the previous Gauntlet runs. Uglybot's out at only 1.65 meters. Now Uglybot is out, but their team swears they'll be back for the next season. I checked the wiki, they're the only team that didn't return in this heat. Now next up, instead of doing the sumo, they do a game called British Bulldogs. Basically, you know the part of the Gauntlet that pretty much all the robots end up doing, where the robots keep running at the house robots, where they make a beeline for the finish? That's the entire game, as all the robots go at once, with all the house robots guarding the finish line. Given how long the Gauntlet was, this should help make things a little shorter. The race starts, and Mortis and Recyclops are right out of the gate. They're just racing along. Mortis easily finishes first. Leebot is struggling to get around, while Recyclops meanwhile has an encounter with Matilda. Detonator is struggling due to its own driving issues, unable to turn left or really move that much at all. David can't watch anymore and just walks off. The stress of the situation clearly is getting to him. Scrapper ends up reaching the finish line, weirdly enough by going backwards. Apparently the robot just drove better that way. Recyclops seemed to stop working for a bit. Leebot is just ignored completely. It's just reaching the finish line at its own pace. No one's looking at it. That's probably the best situation you can have in a competition like this. And then Recyclops manages to flip Matilda over. There's some actually decent oomph to the flipper there. That thing, made it look easy. And it's crazy to think that even in Series 1, with how basic a lot of the robots are, that the house robots are still getting bullied. When the Detonator's team was interviewed, they explained that the batteries went in the robot, which was a bit of a shame, as it meant there was no guesswork as to who was going to go out here, as Detonator went the least distance. Detonator was eliminated, but now we can get to the fighting. They introduced the judges, and one thing that I didn't note last time is no Sharky, and to the people who are new to Robot Wars, that might not make a lot of sense why I'm bringing such attention to a judge, but Null Sharky would go on to judge every series of Robot Wars, so, you're seeing someone who was there from start to finish. Null Sharky's actually pretty passionate about robotics, so, it's great to see him. Now, the first fight was between Recyclops versus Scrapper, which, given how this was, the fight could only really go one way. Scrapper actually does a little bit of a twirl as Recyclops comes in, and you can tell that Scrapper is trying to dance around, but immediately Recyclops, the moment he gets a shot in, was able to flip Scrapper up and over, ending the match. The way that Recyclops' weapon works is actually semi-unique. It's a front hinge flipper, which we've seen plenty of over the years, but the way that it works is, because it's themed like a tongue, the tongue pokes out and then flips. It's probably not the most practical, but it does give a unique look for Recyclops, and makes the robot a lot of fun. It's always nice to see a flipper, and in a time of no Shremex, Recyclops is lethal. Then there was Leebot versus Mortis. Leebot just doesn't have the ground clearance with that 4-bar lifter. It doesn't go that low to the ground compared to a robot like Biohazard, so you really don't get as much use in it as I would have expected. Mortis then goes denting the armor of Leebot with the hammer. leading to the legendary call by Jonathan Pierce of Leebot, Pepper Pot! You could pour pepper out of that Leebot machine! Oh my god, Jonathan Pierce, even when these fights are boring, Jonathan Pierce manages to carry it, but this was not a boring fight at all, as it had some good maneuvering from Mortis as they then began shoving Leebot around and actually managed to tip Leebot over, meaning that Mortis was going to move on to the main event. This heat definitely has some much more exciting robots with Mortis and Recyclops absolutely commanding the arena. However, disaster strikes as before the main event, Mortis's hammer was unable to work. This meant that Mortis was just going to become a pretty ineffective wedge bot. Now this is a massive shame, and to me, one of the biggest what-ifs of the season. What could have happened if we got to see a fully working Mortis taking on Recyclops? I don't mean in terms of who would win. I mean in terms of what the brilliant kind of match we could have seen. The fight begins and they both gun for each other, though Mortis ends up having an odd turn that they have to correct for. It seems Mortis' drive isn't working properly either, as Mortis drives around erratically. Recyclops, due to being slower, can't keep up and take advantage even. Mortis ends up impaled on the spikes and is grazed by the chainsaw tail of Matilda, which that thing never could do much, could it? Mortis finally gets a good push on Recyclops. Recyclops tries to attack, but Mortis gets another ram into the side, where both robots end up stuck on the sidebar, where Shunt takes a few shots. Because they're stuck, it goes to the judges, who end up giving it to Recyclops. Honestly, this was extremely disappointing. These were two of the most entertaining robots of the season, and because Mortis wasn't working properly, the fight massively missed expectations. Overall, this episode was extremely hit and miss. We got some flashes of some fun engineering with Leebot, Mortis and Recyclops, but there was also many moments of disappointments of the robots just not able to perform like expected as things went wrong. A massive shame, and one of the reasons I'm just not a fan of this series of Robot Wars.
Welcome back once again. The Robot Wars reviews have returned once more, and we're at Heat C of the first series. Let's not waste any time, and let's just jump right into this. Now, the robots this heat was Cruella, a basic wedge bot, fashioned with like Dalmatian style dots. At least I'm assuming that's the case, as I think it's just a nod to, you know, the 101 Dalmatians villain Cruella de Vil. They weigh in at 81.2 kilograms, which again, I'm pretty sure the weight limit was about 80, so that's slightly overweight. But again, the weights are all over the place in this like entire season, to be quite honest. After that, we get to see Plunderbird 1, which probably has the most in common with its original inspiration of the Thunderbirds in Puppet Show out of the entire Plunderbirds lineup. And it weighs in at 77.7 kilograms. And I gotta tell you right here, there was a huge missed opportunity. You'll find out more about that later in the video though. Then comes out WYSIWYG, weighing in at, I'm not joking, 10.8 kilograms, which is like, that's barely a featherweight at that point. What is happening? Why are the weights so disparate? Why is this a... Oh my god, they really did struggle to make up the numbers in this first season. And then one of the more notable entries this heat, Robot the Bruce, which comes from the team that will go on to make the Chaos robots, which, if you don't know, stick around, subscribe, because by the time I get to like season 3 of Robot Wars, then oh boy, you're about to find out why Chaos becomes a mighty force. Specifically Chaos 2. Anyway, the robot weighs in at 84.6 kilograms and is shockingly not the heaviest robot of the heat. Then comes in Wedgehog, which is probably the most interesting and least competitive looking wedge of the night, especially at the light weight of 24 kilograms. That is a lightweight robot, not... I get it, like, you know, again, they're trying to make up the numbers, but how in the world were they hoping these robots would compete against robots that are like 3 to 4 times their size? It's crazy. It does get crazier, trust me. Wait till we get to the next heat in next week. And then finally, Dreadnought, the heaviest robot, comes in at a mammoth 92.6 kilograms, which is a lot, even for this season in general. Now, I gotta say, it's also probably one of the most colourful and fun-looking robots we get to see this season. Just a lot of fun decoration going on.
Now once again, the gauntlet is up first, where the robot that makes the least distance will be eliminated. Cruella was up first and guns for Shunt, who immediately just pushes them back. Cruella turns around and tries to back into Shunt. I guess they saw how well Scrapper did running backwards. But this doesn't work, though they eventually do manage to get around Shunt and start driving around into the Skittles. Now this isn't pinball, so that doesn't do them any favours, and they end up finishing there. Not an amazing run, but better than how Jeremy Clarkson reckons, who I feel was a little bit harsh, honestly. They finished with 10.15 meters, yet not a lot, but for this season that's basically a marathon. Next up was Dreadnought, who raced right past Shunt. They end up crashing into Dead Metal, who for a moment looks like it has them, but then lets go and backs away, allowing Dreadnought to make a beeline for the finish and a guarantee into the next round. Dreadnought, however, catches on fire before they get backstage, and now we have the drama of if they can fix the robot in time before the next round, or they'll be eliminated early. I also have to say, the House Robots, there's going to be plenty of times throughout Robot Wars history where we're going to question the driving of the House Robots. Either they get really clumsy, or they're overly aggressive. We're going to get plenty of that, so this is just the tip of the iceberg. Now after that excitement, we got Plunderbird 1, and again they try to take on Shunt, who just shoves them into the ramp, where they try to push past between the ramp and the spiky block thing. They end up wedging themselves, however, and end up stuck, as Shunt starts hitting them with the axe to add injury to insult. At 4.81 meters, they are in really risky territory. Now taking a moment outside of that though, Plunderbird 1 was really forward thinking, being, I believe, the first robot in the show's history to have interchangeable weaponry. Like, I don't mean just, oh, you know, here's an axe, here's a mace. I mean as in, like, here's they have a spike, or they can switch it out for a saw arm. Genuinely, I'm impressed between the theming and the planning that's gone into having them have multiple options for weapons. Like, this is the kind of thing that we see nowadays, to be honest with you, which is really, actually quite interesting to see it like this early on. Next up is WYSIWYG, who just goes and races right into a railing, then tries to go for the ramp, but being so low means they actually end up getting stuck. Shunt tries to get them free, but ends up wedging itself as well and ending up stuck. And this is just a calamity at this point. Dead Metal ends up being the final force to push WYSIWYG free, who tries to get to the maze and barely even starts and even ends up backing away, falling victim to the worst of all, being mocked by Jonathan Pierce. Now, somehow it's a score of 5.55 meters, which is better than Plunderboard's score. I don't know how that was further. That didn't. I'm just saying, like, I know perspective is a crazy thing, but that just didn't look further to me. But whatever. Wedgehog ends up going next against the Gauntlet and decides to go for the maze. The first team to go straight forward instead of the ramp, or the popular option of trying against the House Robots. Dead Metal and Shunt try harassing them, even pushing those Killalot glory holes to try and get to them, which was a bit silly looking, to be honest with you. Wedgehog makes it 13.23 meters after getting stuck on the spikes. Robot the Bruce was next up, and they made it easily around Shunt. Then after knocking one of the Skittles over, drives right into Dead Metal. However, their drive is so good that they not only made it to the finish line, they basically pushed Dead Metal there with them. Finishing the course, they are guaranteed to make it through. Now, with the robots all done, the question remained, was Plunderbird 1 going to go out, or was Dreadnought not going to be able to continue competing? This was then revealed to us when Dreadnought barely managed to make the robot work by replacing a drive motor, the one that had burnt out, with the weapon motor, meaning that Dreadnought has no weapon, but is able to continue, meaning, more importantly, Plunderbird is out, which, my god, that was a real shame. That could have actually been really interesting. The next game is a game of football or soccer, where the robots have to get the ball into the goal against Dead Metal. The ball isn't perfectly round either, with lots of these little metal studs, meaning it's difficult to roll it straight into the goal. You have to properly shove it in. Now we actually see that Wedgehog and Robot the Bruce actually have little bits attached to them to help corral the ball, and Robot the Bruce scores the first goal with that attachment, combined with its superior drive power. It gives me tornado vibes, honestly, looking at this thing.
They then recenter the ball with all the robots kept in place as they then resume. WYSIWYG's front wedge is ripped off by dead metal just kind of swinging around, and Dreadnought is quite obviously just dead. Like, there's no movement at all from this thing, meaning the game is easily over, but they continue on anyway. Wedgehog hits the ball, but dead metal ends up getting it in, leading to a little bit of confusion. After a ruling from the announcer, it's ruled that Wedgehog, because they touched the ball last, it's decided that they get the goal and can move on. Once again, action resumes as Cruella and WYSIWYG come in, and Dead Metal decides to grab Dreadnought and just start bullying it. WYSIWYG is constantly slapped about by Dead Metal, and Cruella manages to score the goal thanks to avoiding Dead Metal's ire. Now before we can continue, it's ruled that WYSIWYG has also broken down, so it goes to the judges, who decide that as Dreadnought supposedly touched the balls more times, they get to go through, which I call bull because Dreadnought has just been dead the entire time. But given that WYSIWYG was a stock robot, or a robot that was kind of put in there to make up the numbers, I think that might be the more likely reason. It's the same thing with like Grunt when it drove off in Sumo. I think it's just a case of, well, we don't actually want this in the competition, it's not a genuine competitor. Ah, dear. Why didn't they do that in the first round? We could have gotten Plunderbird. That's really bothersome, because now it means that Dreadnought, which has broken down twice, has made it through, and Plunderbird, who actually had some really cool tech, they're out of competition in favour of a stock bot. Oh, WYSIWYG, why? As they hype up for the next round, I get to hear backstage, Wedgehog just barely made it through, which, what are you on about? They scored the second goal? You can't say that and then go right to Dreadnought like nothing happened. Oh my god, this show is insane. Anyway, we get to go into the fights now, which is what we've all been waiting for. Robot the Bruce versus Cruella is up first, and right away Robot the Bruce is having some trouble as Cruella easily wedges them. As good as Robot the Bruce's drive power is, you can't make good use of it if you're just a box that can easily ride up a wedge. There's a few more attempts to ram Cruella that ends up failing each time, and just when it looks hopeless, Cruella makes a major driving error, driving into the grill where they end up getting stuck. Robot the Bruce is through, but dang, for a robot with like a team that would go on to such huge things, that was looking pretty bad for them. Next up was Dreadnought versus Wedgehog. Now Dreadnought ran for Wedgehog and can easily push them around with the massive weight disparity. Again, this is like a near 4 times weight difference. They send them into Bash, who tries to cut them with the sword, but the sword pops right off. Matilda tries to attack Wedgehog, and it's looking bleak, but after they back away, Dreadnought begins smoking once again, breaking down for the 3rd time. Now, unluckily for Dreadnought, there's nothing that can save them this time, as this is strike 3. Wedgehog is moving on to the next round, and Dreadnought is out. Meaning the main event, the heat final for this one, is Wedgehog versus Robot the Bruce. While Robot the Bruce struggled with ground clearance, I knew immediately what was going to happen, as they spelled out, with a 4 times weight difference and Robot the Bruce's amazing drive power, this was going to be much easier for Robot the Bruce to shove them around. And as expected, the fight starts with Wedgehog ramming into Robot the Bruce, but it's just pointless. It's like a fly buzzing around, and Robot the Bruce just immediately shoves them onto the grill, where the house robots descend, all looking to attack. Shunt breaks away looking to attack Robot the Bruce, but after Matilda cuts into Wedgehog, the fight is over. And that means that Robot the Bruce will be moving on to the grand final. Now, I gotta say, this might be the most disappointing episode so far. Like, I genuinely think Plunderbird could have had a chance of making it to the grand final with the weapons and Wedge, but WYSIWYG and Dreadnought, who constantly burns out, just prevented that from happening, which is super frustrating. Don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming the Dreadnought team, they just were just doing what they could in the competition. But the whole thing with like the stock robots or whatever they're called, being a part of the competition and going through to the second round, like I get that they're trying to make up the numbers, but why would you let them eliminate the real contenders? That is so frustrating.
That might end up being a bigger what if for me than Barry, honestly. I really wish we could have seen Plunderbird 1 in action here. Welcome back once again to another Robot Wars review. We're still in Series 1, and we're on Heat D, which, honestly, is kind of wild, even by Robot Wars Series 1 standards, which is going to become immediately obvious, as it's a heat filled with featherweights, meaning robots that weigh 12 kilograms or less by the show's standards. Nowadays, I believe it's more like 13 kilograms, but still, these are small. Like, we thought the weights were disparate before, now we're getting, like, a little ridiculous. Now, first up, they show Vector of Armageddon, who, as far as I know, is the only Series 1 robot that is still actually working. Like, it was driven at RoboNerd, and it weighs in at 10.7 kilograms. It gives me vibes of La Machine. Then there's Crazy Tokyo, who isn't even a featherweight, as it weighs in at, I'm not joking, 3.2 kilograms, and isn't even the lightest robot in the heat. Like, are you kidding me? That's close to Beetle weight territory. Like, imagine if this thing won. How in the world would this even compete in the grand final? It would just get ran over by, like, Robot the Bruce or something and just immediately get shattered. Then there's Cunning Plan, which also gives me La Machine vibes, you know, with that simple wedge shape. It's actually a pretty nice looking robot. That comes in weighing at 11.5 kilograms, therefore making it the heaviest robot in the heat! What? Oh my god. I'll be honest, because it and Vector are such similar looking robots, I've gotten them confused before. I mean, yeah, their fundamental shape is different, but they're big grey boxes. So I have gotten them confused before, I will admit. Then you've got Satan, which looks kind of crazy and probably one of the more fun looking robots of the heat, and it's weighing in at 10.5 kilograms. Then you've got Bugs, which is just the cutest little thing. It weighs in at 7.3 kilograms, and there's nothing remotely competitive about it, but I love it anyway. Just like how I love the lightest competitor in the competition, the Demolisher, weighing in at 2.9 kilograms. Sure, it's another, grey box, but, it is so quick that it doesn't matter. It still sticks out to me nonetheless. Allegedly, it could make a top speed of 40 miles per hour, which I don't know if it's true, but it's clearly fast enough that it can drive right off in the intro. This thing is so quick and nimble. I love it. I absolutely love it. Anyway, as always, first up is the Gauntlet, which, again, an obstacle course for the Roboteers, with the person who makes the least distance being eliminated. First up was Cunning Plaid, who decides to go through the maze and does so with ease. With a smaller size, it likely is just a lot easier to get through, as you're not going to crash into the walls as much. After waiting to see which way Matilda would go, Cunning Plaid tries getting past, and it's a struggle, but they make it onto the spikes. Though thankfully this was only a slight delay, as they do end up making it onto the finish line, guaranteeing that they will make it onto the next round. Also, Jonathan Pierce made a joke that Matilda's modelled on his mother, which, hasn't he gone on to make, flirty commentary about Matilda before? I don't know about that one. Then Crazy Tokyo goes up next, racing out into the maze, and while it has a little bit more trouble than Cunning Plan, they do still make it through the maze, and then they decide to actually diverge into the centre path to keep away from Matilda. After weaving through the springs, the last one catches them, meaning that Matilda gets to come in for a closer look, and also gets stuck on the springs. Amazing. Crazy Tokyo made it 12.65 meters, which means that they were relatively safe regardless, thankfully. Next up was Satan, and honestly, I actually have come to like their design a lot more. There's only so much you can do with this kind of, weight class, at least if you're fighting heavyweights. So Satan has gone for a more fun design, with sound effects, a laser eye, and smoke coming out of its nose, which I think was really smart of them, because, what are you going to do realistically here? Despite this, they actually choose to take on the house robots in the Gauntlet, and apart from crashing into one of the spike blocks, they actually race right through, getting to the finish line. I'll admit, I didn't think much of Satan's chances, but they did amazingly well given, what they were up against, as they guaranteed their chance into the next round. The Demolisher was up next, and again, despite being completely grey, it's got a creative little shape. It's basically just a little car. It zooms along as it comes out in the gauntlet. I thought it would be taken out by Matilda when they crashed into each other, but the Demolisher brushes it off and makes it there faster than I think the other two, despite what the show says. The show claims that it didn't get there as quickly as the others, but with that tiny robot, you cannot convince me that that thing didn't get there in record time. It might have been a case of editing though, maybe it really was really slow getting there, but either way, it's safe and we'll be moving on to the next round. Bugs comes out next, and they're kind of cautious actually. It drives out, then back, then changes course. It does manage to make it past Sergeant Bash and then into Matilda, who just swats them away. Bugs is kind of moving like a shopping trolley, as I believe it actually does have some casters on the front and back, as it just keeps veering and turning, clearly not able to drive properly into a straight line. It struggles to make any more progress and is finished at 11.45 meters. We're down to the final robot now in the gauntlet, as Vector of Armageddon by Adam Clark, who would go on to make 259, is the last one to go. They actually decide to go for the seesaw, and make it over with very little issue. Though they do have to toss and turn to get down before heading to the ramp, where unfortunately their low ground clearance, normally a major asset in this kind of competition, is what does them in here, as they get stuck on the ramp. And not only does their run at the gauntlet end here, but their run in the competition as they only make 8.55 meters, which is a massive shame, as it was definitely one of the more competitive looking robots this heat. And given the person who made it, I have a feeling that they could have actually done decently well. Now clearly this isn't much of a heat, as they return to showing footage of the Master by Mark Satrakian versus 4, and again this fight shows that the head start America gets has given them a chance to have far better robots than anything we're going to see this season in Robot Wars. The Master won that fight and likely would win the entirety of this first series of Robot Wars if it was in the competition. Like, it's such a cool looking robot, honestly. Anyway, we move on to the next event now, which was a race, where the robots have to make 3 loops around the track. Once a robot has made the 3 laps, the loser will be, just like the gauntlet, the robot that makes the least distance. Now right out of the gate, Demolisher actually gets flipped over, but is quickly flipped back and finishes the lap first as they speed along, and then finish a second lap before anyone has even finished a single lap. Cunning Plan then finishes a lap as the Demolisher then bumps a corner and is flipped over. The other robots continue trekking on, but Cunning Plan seems to want to try and help, but is unable to flip them over before getting past the finish line and finishing the race. I got to appreciate the sportsmanship from Cunning Plan though to try and help the Demolisher out. Thankfully for the Demolisher, while they met disaster, with 2 laps they were fine. Crazy Tokyo meanwhile made no laps, and therefore they were the ones eliminated this time around. In an attempt to pad things out even further, because again this heat's a big old load of nothing, they show more footage. This time, instead of American robots in UK, they now show an actual bit of footage from the American Robot Wars competition, where we got to see a big old rumble with Vlad the Impaler, Tazbot, La Machine, Mauler, Biohazard, and so many more in a rumble. In it, the Master loses an arm, La Machine tips 2 robots over, and I think they actually won the entire thing. I wish I got to see the full fight. Honestly, again, this is heads and shoulders above anything we get to see in this series, and really shows that we are seeing like the baby steps of the UK combat scene here. Anyway, thankfully we're now onto the fights, and first up was Cunning Plan versus Bugs. Before the fight, Philippa actually interviews the Cunning Plan builder, and she's far more humorous to me than Jeremy. At least in Robot Wars, she's a lot more suited to that environment. So, I know, sorry, unrelated to the fight, but I've just felt like bringing it up. Anyway, I could tell this fight would be one-sided, given that it's a wedge versus basically a high ground clearance shopping trolley. The fight begins, and Cunning Plan dances around before finally going for a wedge that Bugs actually manages to survive, and then they just drove onto the grill. Dead Mel seems to be trying to get it free, but is unable to as the fight is called and Cunning Plan moves on. What a boring fight. Next up, Demolisher versus Saturn. The fight begins and Saturn rushes for Demolisher, who easily dodges them with that speed. Saturn and Demolisher then ram into each other, but don't really do much. Demolisher then has to run from Sergeant Bash, but Saturn actually breaks down. Demolisher nearly gets flipped over by Shunt, but again, luckily, is fine. Matilda then goes and sandwiches Demolisher between it and Saturn and begins lowering that chainsaw tail, which begins cutting into Saturn, but actually gets stopped by Demolisher's metal armor, because, chainsaws really can't do anything to metal as far as I can tell, so yeah. The fight is called and Demolisher is moving on to the main event, and probably the best fight of the entire episode, not counting the American Robot Wars stuff. I should probably stress that. This is probably the best fight with the actual Heat competitors, because, Matilda got involved with the chainsaw and cut a robot up. Anyway, we move on now to the main event between Demolisher and Cunning Plan. Now the fight starts and Cunning Plan comes in. Demolisher backs away before coming in a bit more cautiously because they know that any mistake and they're done. Cunning Plan then just rushes for Demolisher and flips them up and over easily. The weight difference really making all the difference in the world as they didn't stand a chance. Still, it was a short and unremarkable fight and all, but with just how quickly it went. Overall, it was an episode. It wasn't even the worst episode, as while everyone is basically weaponless, they actually worked a lot better than you'd expect for this season and worked better than some of the heavyweight competitors. It was a major contrast to the other episodes in that the first 2 rounds were actually the most exciting part though, with the fights just being boring. Quite a difference from the Feathers and Beetles of today, and I think they did them no favours by showing the American robots. Like, it would have been bad enough doing that with the other heats, with the heavyweights, but the fact that you did them with the weaponless, featherweights and basically beetleweights, unbelievable. Featherweights and beetleweights have come such a long way though. That's another thing. Getting to see the heavyweights of back then really does show you a great contrast with what's around nowadays, and you can see that in this heat as well, because if you watch featherweights and beetleweights in competition nowadays, they're so complex. They're basically scaled down heavyweights. In fact, many heavyweight teams actually use these weight classes to test out new robots. So it's a major shock to the system if you've never seen this episode before, and might be worth it just for that. But again, you probably want to watch some other Robot Wars, some more later on Robot Wars stuff first, before you try watching Series 1. It's time once again for another Robot Wars review. Let's not waste any time, let's get started. Now, Jeremy Clarkson gives the strangest intro I've ever heard in my life. I'm not even going to describe it, I'll just urge you to watch the episode on Mech Plus for this alone. Now let's get to the robots. First up is Warthog, which weighs in at 24.4 kilograms. Now, despite that massively light robot, it actually kind of looks nice. It looks like if Panic Attack just became kind of a strange wedge. I actually really like the look of this machine. It's probably one of the nicer looking ones of the series. Then you have Psycho Sprout, which is just the pinnacle of robotic combat. I don't care what anyone says. And it weighs in at 24.3 kilograms and is apparently a meter each way in terms of size. This thing is enormous. I'm sure it doesn't exist anymore. I'm sure it got scrapped. But listen, if the builders of Psycho Sprout still have it, how much do you want for it? I will pay. I will find a way to get to you, collect Psycho Sprout, pay you the money, and take it back. I need Psycho Sprout. If I could say that I am the proud owner of Psycho Sprout, mwah. Oh, that'd be perfect. Then we get Body Hammer coming in, weighing in at 78.9 kilograms, and is a shape I don't think I've ever seen any robot take. Given it's by the Cold Fusion team, this should come as no surprise to anyone familiar with them, given that they came up with robots like Pussycat and Killy Cranky. They're just a very unique team, honestly. Then there was Talk of the Devil, which is the strangest looking robot of the entire season, as it looks like a beast that came out of hell itself. It comes in weighing at 57.9 kilograms, a little on the lighter end, but a little bit more understandably light compared to, 24 kilograms. Reality comes out and it actually looks quite fun. It looks like a UFO, as Jonathan Pierce notes. It weighs in at 40.8 kilograms. And then finally, there's Full Metal Anorak, which is probably the simplest looking robot, but one of the more effective looking this heat, despite how I feel about their tire cutting blade. They come in weighing at 28.5 kilograms. So, the weight will probably go to bite them in the backside. So of course, first up is the Gauntlet as always, and little time is wasted as we get to see Full Metal Anorak up first. They go for the maze first, and apart from having some issues getting through, they do manage it as they make it to the finish line where Matilda is nowhere in sight. With that, Full Metal Anorak is safe and moving on. Talk of the Devil comes out next and comes out backwards, where we get to see that it has two weapons, a spinning pole and a rear flywheel that they spun up in the pit. God damn it, guys. Talk of the Devil, I will say it is a pretty interesting looking rear flywheel, given that this was just Series 1, it's not too bad. Talk of the Devil gets stuck with Bash on the grill after making it off the turntable, meaning that they only made 4.92 meters, which was honestly very dicey for them. Next up was Body Hammer taking on the Gauntlet, and they also go for the maze, where similar to Full Metal Anorak, they do have some issues making it through, but once again do manage so, and they make a beeline for the exit, where they end up swerving into the grill, but unlike most robots, they're actually able to drive off and cross the finish line. This means that Body Hammer is certain to be safe and will be moving on to the next round. Next up was Warthog. It comes out of the turntable and immediately gets stuck on the wall. Its run ends here, meaning that Warthog only makes 3.92 meters. The next up was Perfection. I mean the greatest robot ever made. I mean the World Championship 7 Giant Nut winner. I mean Psycho Sprout. It rolls out and gets to one of the house robots where it gets stuck against the two spike blocks. After a push from Bash, it does manage to get moving again and rolls further along. It only makes 9 meters, but it is safe. Reality is last up and goes for the seesaw and is very slow climbing up, though with it being as high as it is, it has no real issue making it over. The Killer Lock glory holes do give it a little trouble, but not a lot as it goes up the second ramp, and as it does so, it finishes the course and makes it past the finish line, securing its place in the next round. With that in mind, that means Warthog is out! Jeremy said if he could dock points he would. I can imagine he won't be judging for BattleBots anytime soon. In the next round, this episode's competition is a labyrinth where the house robots roam, and where Sergeant Bash lets loose the flamethrower right next to Jeremy. This would have been after the saw blade nearly decapitated him, wouldn't it? Bloody hell, this is not safe at all, and it seems the house robots just have it out for Jeremy Clarkson. I don't even like the guy that much, but man, what is going on here? Anyway, the robot that doesn't make it or covers the least distance in the labyrinth would be eliminated. Now, Reality and Body Hammer easily make it across the maze, only to be halted by Shunt. Sergeant Bash, meanwhile, is harassing Talk of the Devil and Full Metal Anorak, though Full Metal Anorak did make it past and finish the maze first. Reality ends up dealing with Matilda while Body Hammer tries fighting Shunt and Bash. Full Metal Anorak made it back as well to fight the house robots as the timer ends, and it's readily apparent who will be eliminated as Psycho Sprout basically didn't move at all. It made basically zero distance in the maze. I didn't even mention it at all in this cover because it didn't really do anything. So with that out of the way, it was time for the combat. First up was Body Hammer versus Talk of the Devil. Body Hammer had to change the weapon to a Destructor, while Talk of the Devil went in with a bandage on its bum. The match starts with Body Hammer pushing Talk of the Devil around, ironically having more torque. They try hitting Body Hammer with their rear flywheel but are shoved into the grate, where they are bullied by Shunt and finally pulled free so the contest can continue, where Bodyhammer just shoves them right back. Bodyhammer goes through and is looking good, as it's actually quite aggressive and has a good deal of speed, at least for Series 1. Next up was Reality versus Full Metal Anorak. The fight begins and both robots race for each other. Full Metal Anorak rams and backs away as Reality slowly comes after them. Full Metal Anorak keeps running and Sergeant Bash comes after them with the saw blade. They eventually go back to their corner patrol zone after not really doing much, to be honest. And Reality eventually gets a hold of them and rams them into the wall repeatedly, actually causing dents with their spikes. Full Metal Anorak keeps running and ends up on the grill where they are eliminated. Reality makes it through to the main event, and can I just say, this grill is like this Series 1 arena is trash. Like I've been avoiding saying it. It's just terrible. It's got to be one of the worst arenas that I've ever seen for robot combat. Like, there's so many parts which the robots just get stuck on, which means the fights end way too quickly. I mean, they're not up to much fighting anyhow, but any potential of a fight gets just thwarted by this grill. At least with the pit, there's a little bit of tactics. Like, I see some people who don't like the pits. I actually really do like it. I think it gives a great out for control bots to have a look in. Otherwise, it's just spinners and flippers. But, like, the grill is ridiculous. Like, there's no tactics to it. You just gotta hope that someone makes a driving mistake or just shove them on. With the pit, you gotta push the button. You gotta push the robot into the pit. The grill just makes no sense to me. This arena is awful. I'm so glad they eventually upgrade it to the Robot Wars arena that we know and love. Anyway, it's time for the main event, Reality versus Bodyhammer. The fight begins and Reality races out while Bodyhammer is a lot slower at first before racing at Reality. They end up missing and actually ram into dead metal. They back away, realising their mistake before ending up ramming into Matilda. They just love antagonising the house robots, don't they? Matilda tries fighting them, but ends up getting Reality instead. Bodyhammer ends up driving onto the grill, and it looks like it's over as the house robots descend, but thankfully Reality gets them free so that the fight can continue. Thank you, Reality, oh my god. But they end up on the grate afterwards. I think Bodyhammer tries pushing them free, but they only end up pushing them further, meaning that the fight is over and Bodyhammer wins the fight. God damn it, the grate got involved again. Overall, this was a weird episode. No one looked necessarily amazing, but Bodyhammer was definitely the most impressive. I'm admittedly becoming wearier the more of Series 1 I go through, but thankfully there's just one more episode to go and we're on to the Second Wars, which I don't remember anything about the Second Wars besides the fact that Sir Killalok gets introduced, but I'm almost certain that the quality is going to be quite a noticeable step up. So I'm actually really looking forward to when I can start doing those Series 2 reviews.
Here we are with the last episode of Series 1. Yes, seriously, it's already over. They combined the last heat and the grand final into one episode. And if you think that means that this is going to be some sort of bumper episode full of fights and action, guess again. The grand final is one fight with the Heat finalists. Now the intro brings up how Bodyhammer has joined Roadblock, Recyclops, Robot the Bruce, and Cunning Plan in the grand final, and how they just need to find one more robot, which will be decided in this episode. Scarab is shown off first, and it looks like an Egyptian tomb, and its weapon looks odd. It weighs in at 86.3 kilograms, so a little on the heavier side. The blob comes out next, and the name is certainly accurate, as it's just this blob of machinery and spray paint. It weighs in at 73.9 kilograms. Tracy comes out, and it looks like something that I would expect from Robot Arena 2. In fact, it reminds me of Eye Poker. It weighs in at a very light 52.9 kilograms. And now we got the king of rock and roll, Elvis. No, that's not a joke. Elvis has some mental hips as it's able to lift itself up, and it weighs in at 65.7 kilograms. Visually, it's actually kind of interesting looking,
but it would get a lot better looking in Series 2, which hopefully we'll get to in the near future. Now, possibly one of my favourite robots of Series 1 comes out next, as Prince of Darkness comes out, weighing in at 27.5 kilograms. It's basic, but I'm a huge fan of it based on its performance, which you're going to soon find out about. And finally, the lightest of the competition is Eubank the Mouse. And it's another one of my favourites of the season because, I mean, just look at them. It's such a cute little design. As always, the gauntlet is up and the blob comes up first. Making their way out of the turntable, they ponder along past Bash, but they're cut off by Dead Metal, who stops them from making a beeline to the finish. Matilda then comes over as Dead Metal and then Bash begin pushing them back as the blob soon stops moving, assumedly breaking down. Covering a distance of about 7 meters, it was definitely looking quite risky for them. Elvis starts off, and as you can see, its ability is to push its body upwards into the air, something that would never make sense in Robot Wars or in any robot combat competition. But it's kind of funny and it's kind of neat. But it's certainly quite bizarre at the same time. My assumption is that they were hoping it would make it easier for them to climb up the ramp because then they can't get stuck. But it does nothing for them, as they do still end up getting stuck on the seesaw. It only makes about 2.75 meters, and yeah, let's be honest, it's quite clear that this robot's going out. Tracy makes its way out next and easily pushes past Bash, but ends up driving into the wall, where they begin to slow to a crawl before basically stopping entirely. It's quite sturdily built externally and shockingly invertible, but which is quite surprising for this time period. Robots typically, the moment you flip them over, they were done. But reliability is definitely an issue here. But with a distance of 8.7 meters, that was nothing to worry about. They were clearly safe. Eubank the Mouse was up next and raced right out past Bash and into the wall. It manages to get into some sort of massive Dynasty Warrior style battle with the house robots and somehow makes it past them all to the finish. Oh my god. I love how this robot, I'm pretty sure this robot was like one of the stock bots put in to make up the numbers. Why are they letting them go past the first round? I know I've said this before in these Series 1 reviews, but it does not make sense to me. These are the robots that you put in to fill up the numbers, and you're letting them eliminate actual competitors? That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Next up was Scarab, who crawls at Sergeant Bash, but Bash is just not willing to put up with this sluggish display, and is far more aggressive this time, meaning that Scarab is sandwiched between both Bash's and Dead Metal's saws. They keep squeezing past and barely make it to the finish line. Finally up is Prince of Darkness, who goes right up and over the seesaw with ease, which, based on some of the performances with the other robots, you can understand how for Series 1, that's not too bad. They then climb up the ramp and make it over to the finish line, where Matilda then pushes them back. And then they suddenly try to get technical with it and say, oh, it wasn't all the way through. So it gets past Matilda and makes it through again. Now, what is going on here? I don't remember that ever being a thing. Suddenly with Prince of Darkness, now it needs to be all the way... I don't know. I'm sure that people can point out the other times that people did make it all the way through, but that just seems such a weird point to bring up. And what was that cretin Jeremy talking about? That's the worst robot he's ever seen and looks miserable. That thing completed the gauntlet twice and made it look easy. He deserved to lose Top Gear for that alone. I mean, the Blob and Uglybot are right there, and they look way worse. Don't get me wrong, Prince of Darkness is not much of a looker, but I don't know, it's not as bad as some of the other robots we've seen. Now, the next round is Robot Snooker, where a ton of balls are in the center of the arena, and the idea is that the robots need to scoop as many balls as possible in their goal. More like a robot Hungry Hippos. Notably, Prince of Darkness comes with a scoop to aid them in their goal. The event begins, and there are balls everywhere, and Tracy is stuck! Prince of Darkness gets the first ball, followed closely by Scarab. Prince of Darkness is just making a mockery of this game, pocketing 6 balls overall. While it looks dicey for Blob and Tracy, Eubank
breaks down, quote unquote. I think again it's more of a case of a loner bot being thrown out on the second round for the actual competitors, which again, do that on the first round! I don't understand! Again, Jeremy tries to downplay Prince of Darkness' achievements. Oh, you weren't up against much. Even with the opponents that could try, they didn't do much. Prince of Darkness beat them 6 times over. I'm not standing for this slander. Yeah, they weren't up against much, but this is Series 1. Like, 90% of the robots are kinda bad. Like, it's people figuring out this format at all. There's not even enough robots to make up the numbers. You gotta give Prince of Darkness some dues. Like, yeah, it's nothing special, but it's the best of a bad lot. Anyway, it's time for the fights next, and first up is Scarab versus the Blob. The two bump into each other to start off. Scarab ends up missing a swing, and the Blob, who seems to have broken again, is then pushed into the wall where the house robots have at it with them. The fight ends right there. Oh well. Sorry, there's not much to say here. This is what I mean, like, don't get me wrong, it's obviously the very, very early days of robot combat. Like, I know that, you know, because it had only been a few years in America, and this was like the first one in the UK. But like, this is why I say, like, you should only watch this once you're like hardcore into robot combat, because Series 1, it's a tough watch. Then we have Prince of Darkness versus Tracy, and Prince of Darkness actually repainted their bot beforehand. And, you know, because obviously of all the disses at its appearance. And while they say it's better, they then get roasted for changing it. It's a conspiracy. What have they all got against this robot? It's been the best performing so far. Oh, it's so ugly. It's so basic. Okay, we'll repaint it. Oh, it looks even worse now. Leave them alone. Oh my god, leave my baby alone. Now the fight starts and Tracy and Prince of Darkness have a pushing contest. Tracy looks a little slow, but then as Prince of Darkness drives around, Tracy ends up ramming into Prince of Darkness' side and punctures the left wheel. This is definitely a mistake that would not be made nowadays, you know, filling tires up with air, that's not really a thing that people do anymore. It limps along before the other wheel ends up getting punctured, and so Prince of Darkness just can't do much, so the house robots descend to finish the job. That's the one big weakness of Prince of Darkness, is it's great for gauntlets and minigames, but for the actual combat, yeah, it's woefully weak. Oh wait, shit, sorry, I forgot about the bits. Life isn't fair, your dreams will never come true, and one day you will die and be forgotten, all because Tracy beat Prince of Darkness. Why, Tracy? Why? Anyway, we move on to what would normally have been the main event, Scarab versus Tracy. Now, Scarab has been lent Killatron's mace to help them deal more damage. The two clash and Scarab's weapon is all the way down. What were they hoping to do? Tracy rams into Scarab and rips some of the armor off. Then they go and ram into Bash as well, as Scarab is cut into with the chainsaw tail of Matilda, one of the few times the chainsaw tail actually could do anything, where Tracy decides to fight them next before ramming into Bash again, as the fight goes to the judges, who give it to Tracy, who moves on to the grand final. And I actually have to say, this was a good fight from Tracy, where it must be said, easily the best performance it's given us. It's a simple design, but oftentimes a simple design can just work really well, and this seems like a very solid design to have in Series 1. Now with the final winner decided, the final fight, the grand final, is here! The Heat finalists are going to compete in one big group battle, and... okay guys, how the hell is Cunning Plan meant to win this when it's almost a tenth of the weight of its opponents? Also, did Jeremy call it an orgy? That doesn't seem appropriate for BBC. Anyway, the fight starts and the robots all race for each other. Tracy rams into a Cyclops and Roblox tries and fails to wedge them. Cunning Plan then tries to create some distance before running into Robot the Bruce to no effect. Tracy then rams into Cunning Plan and actually ends up stuck on top of Cunning Plan. And due to the fact that Tracy is beached on top, unable to move, and Cunning Plan is being weighed down, both robots are taken out just like that.
completely immobile. Roblox then manages to wedge a Cyclops, who barely makes it away, but their chain then breaks off, once again meaning that another robot has been immobilized. That means that we've got 3 robots down and 3 to go. Robot then goes and tips Robot the Bruce over. Robot the Bruce, despite looking like a tornado in Series 1, is not invertible, so that is the end of Robot the Bruce. Body Hammer meanwhile runs away from Roblox, who wedges them, but they aren't able to make much of it, as Body Hammer does nothing but keep on running as the fight ends and it goes to the judges. Of course, with 2 eliminations under its belt, Roadblock easily wins and takes the trophy as the first ever champion of Robot Wars, on TV at least. You know, there is the American Robot Wars, but the winner of Robot Wars The First Wars. Before they leave us, they do give a few additional awards, giving Mortis the title of the Best Engineered Robot, which I can kind of agree with. Nemesis got the Sportsmanship Award, which from what I could tell, also makes sense. Plunderbird 1 got the Best Design Award, which just makes me sad seeing as we never got to see it fight. And Psycho Sprout got the Most Original Entry. In fact, it's so original, I've only ever seen one other large-scale robot try it, being Orb of Doom. Like, how many robots like Psycho Sprout have you ever seen? And I don't mean like round robots, I mean robots that roll, like Psycho Sprout and Orb of Doom do. Those are the only 2 I know of, at least. Overall, I'd only recommend you watch this series like dead last. When you're as deep into enjoying these shows as I am, it can be fascinating to take in the spectacle of some of the earliest days of the sport, where people are still figuring things out, you know, on an international scale. Yeah, the Americans had it figured out at this point, but over in the UK, this was brand new. But apart from a few highlights here and there, it's really rough viewing. There's some robots that I like in this series, but the fights are so often really big letdowns. So many robots fall so easily to the gauntlet. Some of the robots just cannot do the mini games in the center. It's really rough, and I can't blame the builders too much, because they're just trying to make something that works. It would take a while before people really got an idea on how to make a viable fighting robot. The last fight was probably the best overall in the series, with some of the best in the competition, and the fact that there was just so many robots, meaning there was a lot more going on. But yeah, overall, don't watch it if you're just a casual fan, but if you are a hardcore fan and you have been watching Robot Wars, you've watched BattleBots, you may have even watched King of Bots, give this a check, and best check it on Mech Plus, because like I've said before, Mech Plus is a great place to check it in the highest quality possible. Not a sponsored segment, this is not sponsored. I just wanted to direct people to Mech Plus because I think that's the best way to see these in a nice high quality. And you can do it for free, so, I mean, there's that. Anyway, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like on this video. Comment down below, you know, maybe you saw this episode and say what you enjoyed about it, or maybe if you liked or disliked this episode. If you could share this video around with your friends, that would be super appreciated to get more eyes on the channel. Subscribe and hit that notification bell to be notified of future videos on the channel. We got a lot coming up. There's a lot of stuff happening on the gaming side of the Robot Combat community right now. There's just a lot going on. Fuck, it's going to be making a comeback at the end of the week. You know, it's a fun time, really. There's a lot going on, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. Also, if you want to give me that extra bit of support, we do now have memberships which have custom emotes and soon enough bonus videos. You do not have to, of course. It's not going to be anything like life-changing, but it helps me out. Either way, any support you give is truly appreciated. Thank you all so much, and I hope to see you all next time. Later in the week,